Thank you, everyone. Sorry about that delay. I think when I had to think about this presentation, I had to decide whether I want to be a very technically correct person or if I actually want to give a message on a broader scale that would actually help us look. Because if you look at all the presenters that are going to go through this event today, I think you're going to have enough technical know-how that you're going to take out of this whole security event today. However, when we start looking at emerging threats, I think one of the key things that we understood within government at the moment, if you look at any government department, whether it be SARS, whether it be any national department or even the city of Johannesburg where I'm from, business transformation is a key driver. And with it, unfortunately, when you start looking at how you start improving your services, you're starting to open yourself up to dealing more direct service, more people getting online, creating that additional loads that are going to come into your environment, additional access point that's going to come into your environment. And when we start looking even at smart city itself is allowing, for the first time, people to connect with technology, to connect with systems, to connect with business process. And what that does is it actually then opens up the door even more, where for the first time a little machine somewhere sitting in a dungeon can do a flow of a meter and tell me what is consumed and actually get direct access to the back end of all our systems. And all it takes is a very intelligent person to expose that. So you can also see that because government is, sorry for the cliche, government departments will always tell you that, and politicians will always tell you that is government by the people, for the people, to assist the people, and so on. But we know sometimes, I used to always say this in communism, they have a very interesting saying. They say in communism we are all created equal. The only thing is some of us are more equal than others. So the same thing in your citizen transformation exercises that you want to go through as a public sector department, you have to cater for those more than equals. You have to look at John Arendts as a split personality disorder waiting to happen. Because who am I really? Am I the customer that consumes water and electricity? Am I a citizen that you are accountable to as an electorate? Am I a resident who happens to just stay within your municipal area? Or am I something else? Or am I someone that you need to look after for the next 10, 15 years, an indigent or a pensioner, for that matter? Who am I really? So it's important then when we look at the left side of the government transformation sector, you'll find now that certain human services priorities starts playing a bigger role. And with that comes the ability to transition into digital government, justice and public sector, and safety security issues. You'll see that Gauteng, as an example, launched an app where you can press a button and before you know it, the police rocks up. I remember in the old days that the police would rock up and we tried to dodge them so they don't arrest us because we protesting against some injustices that we had to. We were running away from them. In fact, we weren't calling them not to come to my house. In fact, not that. And therefore, even when we look at now with this integration that we're having from a government transformation perspective, the defense priorities has also changed. I mean, if you look at the military today, I think they are more digital than all of us would even think they are. So when you look at that perspective from a government viewpoint, you'll find out that security itself is now starting to become part and parcel and entrenched in every single digital transformation pillars. So when you look at e-government in any way, there's government services that needs to be delivered, and we are all saying that, you know what, why do I have to go and stand at Home Affairs in a queue? Why can't I do this on my phone? Why can't I do this at a government office anywhere? Why do I have to go to the Department of Home Affairs? Well, guess what? You can go to ABSA now and FNB and all these sort of places which are closer to you. But we're still not dealing with the indigency and the nature of indigency within the South African context. So how do we deliver digital services to an indigent that doesn't have access to broadband, that doesn't have access to a computer or a phone that is smart enough to be able to do what we want them to do? And on top of that, how do we deal with the issue around identity? Because it's important that when we look at all of this, how we excel in the citizen experience is how public judges us. But I know that the unfortunate thing is that, and the security teams will tell you this every day, you have to always toss up between the experience and the security. Sometimes you find that the more you open up the experience, the more you open up your security and vice versa. So it's a very thin line that we need to deal with. And that's why sometimes when you have to look at operational excellence within your environment and what you are trying to achieve excellence on, security as a forethought, not an afterthought, has to be built into your design. When you start looking at your asset utilization, so assets, I know for the bankers, they think about assets differently. In government, we think about assets differently. I mean, in a municipality, when we talk assets, we talk about pipes, electrical cables, conduits, all the things that we're using in terms of doing business with. But the risk mitigation is always there. Now, one thing that government does very well is audit. We get audited, I don't know how many times a year, and I think Dr. Zani sits over there, he's the head of our security for the city of Johannesburg. I'm glad he has the job, not me. Because when it comes to audits, you are being audited consistently. And the challenge that we have is that how do you minimize risk when you have to deal with culture? And you see I've got a big direct X through culture, because that's the flaw. An organizational culture might not be good for its security. So while you can just walk into a walk-in center and do what you need to do, it might not be good because you are opening yourself up to a lot of things. You'll find also that we now want to do things smarter and faster, and we do things like AI and RPA and all these fancy acronyms that I can throw at you for the whole day. And what they essentially mean is that the ability for me as a person to make a decision is taken away by a machine. You see the difference between a person and a piece of technology is that a piece of technology will do what you tell it to do. And it will not do what you don't tell it to do. But a person is an emotive being. And that is why you'll find that in the security sector, the biggest failure is the person. And why is that? Because a person deals in trust and technology in zero trust. Because we are brought up to say that when it comes to family, we need to trust each other. And that is why when you start looking at how you actually deal with funding around those strategic pillars, you have to decide what you want to fund. Are we going to find and become so rigid that we can't do business at the end of the day? Or are we going to start funding mitigations around certain known issues? But that's going to take me another time. Now, when you start looking at government has taken some very key innovative things that are already in industry. I'll give you an example. So in the city of Johannesburg, we have what we call an integrated governance framework. And when you look at that integrated governance framework, we had to make a decision, how do we actually apply a governance framework? Because how you are governed, how your framework is, what you adopt as policy, is how you're going to be measured, is how you're going to be audited, is how they're going to track your compliance or non-compliance. Now, if you look at the convergence of frameworks today, I mean, who can tell me, a few years ago, if I asked you what was the difference between COVID and ETL, it was straightforward, right? You could say, no, ETL is a delivery framework, and we use that for help desk and service management and blah, 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 right? And COVID is this whole big management oversight thing, and we do 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. But look at it today. I mean, in the olden days, we used to say, if I talk security and if I don't talk ISO 20000, 27000 and X, I wouldn't be talking security, but today COVID is, so is ETL, so is everybody else. So how do you actually get to a position where you actually look at it from an enterprise architecture perspective and decide what is it that I need? So what we did in the city is we said, you know what, we have to take a stab in the sand somewhere. And we said, COVID will be our management framework, but we're only taking those elements that has to do with management and oversight. It will be a service delivery framework, and we take those elements. ISO will deal with security, 38005 is quality, and so on and so on. And so we went and built up an integrated management framework that actually makes sense to us. Because otherwise you're going to be audited 4 times for the same thing. And if you're in the bank, you know exactly what I mean, because there's SOX and King and everybody and COBIT, and they look at each other and they say, but don't we speak the same language anymore? So that is why we had to come up with an architectural framework that is borrowed from TOGAF, as government people know. GUIA is nothing more than TOGAF on steroids. And that government-wide enterprise architecture framework, we then looked at it for the city and said, how are we going to align, transform, and maximize? So we deal with issues of strategy, modernization, and so on. I'm not going to go into this whole thing, but what we then essentially did was to build a house of values, and that's the one you see on your right. So that house of values would actually then say, how do we deal with smart delivery? How do we deal with smart city? How do we deal with those issues? What's that single view of our citizen, our customer? And like I said to you, that citizen is actually a multiple personality disorder situation, because he's the customer, he's a resident, he's an electorate, he's somebody that elects and brings people into power. So how do we deal with those issues? So I think when you start looking at security, if you then don't start understanding the supporting architecture that's beneath it, you might find yourself in a bit of a challenge. Now, everyone today is on digital transformation, paperless society. But I can tell you one thing, that we haven't printed as much paper as we did last year. Actually, I'm just lying, guys. In government, we still print more paper every day because the AG still wants to see paperwork. They still want to see an original signed signature in things. The Municipal Systems Act is talking to the Municipal Structures Act and all these other pieces of legislation. So, yes, while we're doing digital transformation for our customers, but how are we digitally transforming ourselves? How are we making sure that I don't need to find 100 pens to sign 20 reports every day just so that we can get certain things done? So I think we need to start looking at the policies around digitization as government, as public sector landscape, because from doing everything to driving the digital economy, the workforce and employment, and I'm picking on those 2 things specifically, but I'll talk to them about later. So whether we're doing blockchain and all these other fancy technologies, at the end of the day, the question you always need to ask yourself, how can I deliver that securely? Right? Trick question, eh? You know, the answer is as big as your budget. And unfortunately, the technology that we have in terms of our shared responsibility around cybersecurity, there's a lot of inequalities, unfortunately. And I know that my previous speaker, I think in one of his slides, he spoke about, get one solution, and that will work for them. But in public sector, when you look at technology, you need to look at ways how it will actually exacerbate the inequalities and the risks while you are, that security thing is still a constant concern. The second thing is that the technology sector will be amongst the central targets of stronger industrial policies and enhanced state intervention. Are we not crying to government and saying, can you stop letting them take pensioners' money and all these people that are online and says you've won 10 million rand and give us your banking details, and before you know it, your bank account is empty? Somebody phones you on a telephone call and they say, Ms. Arons, I want to talk to you about X, and the next minute you have a deduction going off your account. And then they're very clever because they hit it under what we call the threshold. And that account under the threshold is like 50 to 100 bucks, because they know at the bank it's going to cost you 150 rand to reverse it. So financially it makes sense just to let them steal the money. So it's those kind of things. Now, because government aid and military expenditure and the investment that's going into technologies over the next couple of years, whilst it's helping us to advance, but it's also opening up other challenges that I want you to consider as a forum today. So I think it's important that when you start looking at that cost, unfortunately, if your government doesn't have money, if your department doesn't have money, if your business doesn't have enough money, you are going to be found wanting based on your budget. So I think it's important that when you start looking at budgeting from a security perspective, that you actually make security inclusive of your budgeting process and not an afterthought. And that's why even when you do your EA assessments from an enterprise perspective, you need to make sure you put those things in. For those that can't afford to have digital security or cyber security into their businesses, There is places where we need to go, and I think as public sector, one of the things we are not doing very well is sharing. So even if you can't afford something, find someone that is in public sector that can share with you what they have. You don't need to sit there because you don't have money. Find ways of sharing and working together. And I think the GITO councils within government, both at a national, provincial, and local levels, needs to find different ways of how they can share. Not just the knowledge and expertise, but also how we can assist each other. Because if you are a sectorial partner to me, which means you are like Home Affairs or Health or whatever, and as a city I need to engage with because I deliver those services, why can't I join hands with you as sectorial partners and we actually do this thing jointly? So there are different ways around how we actually procure and how we do all these things. And the same thing goes with information. The same thing goes with skills. Because we might not have the money to employ our own CISO, but we might have money together to employ a CISO. So I think the way that we think about security needs to fundamentally change. And